Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to our attribution webinar. I am Leah, Data's Director of Sales and Marketing. And today we're going to talk about why a CRM is just the first step in solid attribution and measuring ROI.
And I'm Erin, Data's Chief Strategy Officer and a lucky primary troubleshooter of CRM attribution issues. So don't worry, today we'll be keeping things fairly high level. Some of you probably know most of what we'll talk about and will hopefully glean a few ideas. Some of you may find that segments go outside of your comfort zone, but hopefully that gives you an idea of where to research further. For a lot of this, we're going to speak in generalities because the real life implementation of these concepts really are dependent on your individual sales and marketing stacks and processes. And we're always happy to dive deeper and ideate with you one-on-one if you'd like to continue the conversation after this. First of all, I do want to narrow the scope of this presentation a bit because marketing attribution is this very broad topic with a million acronyms and many, many ways to skin the cat. Broadly speaking, I break it into two main types. So there's marketing that we can attribute via correlation. So media mix modeling, anything to do with incrementality or lift, geo-experimentation, and anything that relies on a control group would fit into this bucket. And so this is marketing, measuring marketing efforts when there's not a direct link between the marketing itself and the transaction or lead. It can be a blurry line. For instance, if you have thousands of billboards notifying people that you can get a guaranteed offer on their house, you might include a tracking phone number, and occasionally you might get a call from someone who's just so impressed that they have to pull over and safely call that phone number. But the value of those thousands of billboards, you're not going to measure that by the direct phone calls. What you would try to measure instead is how many people are now aware of you, how many more people were likely to call you versus another realtor. And this type of measurement is a little difficult, requires a kind of a certain level of scale and a little fuzzy. Like, how much is it actually worth to Chris Lindale that most of you knew that's who I was talking about? So then we have the other type of marketing attribution, which is what we can trace directly. This is what we'll be talking about in this presentation. So this is when you're running campaigns or other marketing outreach efforts that do have that direct line between the marketing itself and the resulting lead or transaction. For example, if you're at a trade show and you've got, your typical fishbowl giveaway thing, now you reach out to everyone who dropped their business cards in the fishbowl, you can trace those leads directly back to you being at that trade show. With one important caveat, because nothing's simple. What we can trace directly is still impacted by what we can only correlate. We can't reliably know why that fishbowl lead's first brand impression was. Maybe they've been seeing our giant billboards for weeks before they drop their card in the fishbowl. But today we're not going to let perfectionism get in the way of progress. It's still critical to track and attribute where you can, even if it's not the entire picture. So today's presentation is going to focus specifically on directly tracking your internet leads back to your digital campaigns.
And for those of you not in Minnesota, you can Google Chris Lindale for his marketing campaign. Very effective. So what we can trace from our lead generation efforts to revenue recognition factors a few key areas on the data that we need clarity on. As marketers, we spend money on campaigns, we get leads, these leads get worked and turned into customers. And as marketers, we also want to know the cost of these leads, which leads are quality, and did we net positively in our investments? Ultimately, we want to know where do we get the most bang for our buck, and let's spend more money there and less on efforts that don't have the same return. Most of us have this information. We're running campaigns, we're hopefully closing deals, but knowing if it's accurate can be the challenge. Reconciling revenue numbers is time consuming. How do you make sure you're getting accurate data from the start? Or if you have this data, how do you clean it up to get the information that you're looking for? That's what we'll go through today. So today's agenda includes walking you through lead generation basics, how to define what quality means. So some of you in the response sounded like you had a good MQL definition. Some of you don't have it qualified, so we can hopefully help those that don't have it fully qualified. Why capturing the first touch point with a prospect is critical to your attribution. We'll cover a sales process and why data hygiene impacts more than the finance team. And then we'll have examples of CRM do's and don'ts. And while revenue recognition isn't always a flashy topic, to ensure you can properly track your ROI, we'll outline the needed metrics and inputs to capture and review moving forward. And then we'll leave you with a checklist to take back to your team to hopefully clean up your attribution. So we will dive in, starting with lead generation. And so for lead generation, you want to make sure you have a framework for defining the steps in your sales process. So in our quiz, 50% of you said you did and 50% said you didn't. So some general definitions and common language you should have in place. And so having this builds better handoffs for your team, improves your forecasting, and sharpens your attribution. Commonly, we see sales stages defined as MQL, SQL, and opportunity. So at a very basic level, a marketing qualified lead or MQL is obviously not junk. It shows promise to add to the funnel. An MQL would have filled out a form, downloaded a resource, or attended maybe a webinar. An MQL helps align the team for who is in your funnel and who should move through additional nurturing with your sales team. An SQL or sales qualified lead has been vetted by a sales rep. The prospect is interested and worth your sales team's time. An SQL matches your ICP, has been vetted for advance of budget, authority, need, and time, has shown buying intent, such as requesting a demo or responding to outreach that you've made. And an opportunity would be next after that, typically defined as having meaningful sales engagement. The prospect has returned your sales team's calls or emails, has maybe had a proposal delivered. Generally, an opportunity has a reasonable assumption that it would close. So you all might have your own definition for your sales stages. Sounds like some of you do, but you should be defining these as part of your attributions. So for those that didn't, you can maybe use how we described it as some framework. For attribution framework, first source is where the leads will actually come from. So whether that be Google, a trade show, or so on, and you'll want to make sure this is accurate. Conveniently, Erin will touch on next how capturing first source can be automated. So I'll pass it back to her to go through that.
All right. So assuming that we are talking about leads who have landed on your website and submitted a form or otherwise converted, there is a lot of possibility to automatically capture attribution data on those leads automatically. And that's almost always going to be better than relying on other methods. So of course you can have your salesperson ask your future customer how they found you. Of course you could have the form include a how I heard about you drop down, but that's not going to be as reliable as actually seeing hard data on what drove their first click to their website and maybe the last click when they actually converted. So there's a couple different ways to get this data. Generally, if you've got Google Analytics or some other web analytics platform, they're capturing some aggregate data about this if they're set up correctly. Things like, oh, you got 100 sessions from organic and 20 of those converted. That is useful data, that's key to collect, but it only goes so far. And for our purposes today, we're trying to attribute at the individual lead level. It's great to know that 10 leads came from Google Ads. It's better to know that Susie came from Google Ads and spent $500,000 over the next 6 months. Probably the most common way to automatically capture source data on conversions is by using what's called UTM tags. UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module, which was acquired by Google Analytics in ye olden days of the World Wide Web. So that's just some helpful background info for your next nerd trivia night. And you can see real life examples here in yellow. So this is me. I did a search for fish food because I got to feed an urchin. And in this example, which I clicked on in Google, the UTM source is Google product. So it was on the products list on the side. The medium is organic because I clicked an organic offering, not a paid offering. And the UTM content is Tetra, which is the brand of the fish food that was being advertised. So Chewy's analytics team here, if I actually bought the fish food, would be able to trace my purchase of freeze-dried bloodworms all the way back to Google Shopping. Google Ads and some other ad platforms generally allow you to automatically build these UTM tags, or they might append them themselves. But you can also manually build out UTM enhanced URLs to use for things like QR codes, referral links, maybe other types of more manually placed ads. That's step one. Once you've got the UTMs in your campaign URLs, then you've got to capture that data on the other end whenever you get a new lead. The best case scenario is capturing that UTM data within your CRM. So some CRMs like HubSpot will automatically capture this data if they're set up correctly. Other CRMs might involve more manual setup and some level of integration with your website forms in order to capture UTMs. As a general best practice, I like to see that, when someone submits a website form, that's creating a new lead in a CRM. This eliminates the chance of a lead getting missed in someone's inbox. And if that's what you've already got set up, if forms are already creating an entry in your CRM, it may only take a few extra steps to also capture that UTM data with the form. If you're not able to automatically pipe leads into your CRM from your website forms, you'll have to capture that UTM data with your form fills a different way. This might be through the form software. It might be through another additional analytics platform, but you'll want to capture form fills with the email address along with that UTM data that accompanies it. And then you'll want to match up that data between your lead capturing system, whatever you adopted to catch those UTM tags and form fills, and your CRM. You're generally going to use the email address as your key to tie data together unless there's some unique identifier you can use instead. This is very doable, but it can be more manual. And if you're already working with us here at Dayta, we may already be doing this for you as a part of your reporting. So next, we'll dig into the sales process and how that impacts attribution.
Thanks, Erin. Yes, in the sales process, data hygiene is critical. And if your team isn't disciplined in entering in the CRM, the data can get really messy fast. So if your CRM data is messy, your attribution will be too, and measuring your ROI will be infinitely tougher. So starting with basics in your CRM, the contact information. There should be one contact per person. No duplicates, no 5 versions of the same person with slightly different emails. The same goes for company information. You're going to want to avoid creating multiple companies with slightly different variations, like Coke, Coca-Cola, and the Coca-Cola Company. These are all the same organization. In your CRM, you might need to think in terms of that parent-child relationship as well, especially if you're working with franchises, subsidiaries, or multi-brand portfolios. So for example, if you are working with Coca-Cola, but you also might be working with Sprite, Fanta, Fresca. You want to organize these correctly in your CRM. Data hygiene also requires ongoing updates and cleanup. It is not a set it and forget it situation. If no one's reviewing the data regularly, you'll have more to sort through when trying to tie back to your efforts. So Erin will illustrate how often this happens just by accident.
All right, so in my work, helping our clients with attribution, I end up digging into many different CRMs. And pretty much all of them have the same underlying structure, give or take bells and whistles. So this example that I'm showing here would be your typical healthy, happy, well-maintained CRM. So companies, contacts, and deals are your most basic building blocks of a CRM. They might be named slightly different things, like we might call a deal an opportunity. If it's a CRM that's really focused on enabling lead nurturing, it may actually have kind of 2 types of contacts. It might have lead and then contact, kind of symbolizing different stages of the life cycle. Regardless of what the names are, the concepts are all the same. And each of these different building blocks has different data associated with them, and they're all related to each other in similar ways. So a single company can generally be linked to multiple contacts and multiple deals at once. A single contact can generally be linked to 1 or more deals. A single deal can also generally be related to 1 or more contacts. It'll differ by CRM, how many contacts can have, how many companies a contact can have, etc. But that's kind of the most basic level. So here what we have is my dream world of a beautiful CRM with 3 separate companies in it that are all different companies. And they've each got 2 contacts, and each contact is linked to 1 CRM or to 1 deal. This does not actually happen in real life most of the time. From my excursions into many different live CRMs, I can tell you that reality tends to be a bit messier. So some mess is okay, but what we've got going on here is this is an attribution disaster is the technical term for it. So these 3 companies all got added to the CRM over time by different people, and they're all the same company, but because they're named differently, this CRM hasn't been smart enough to detect the duplicates. We've also got multiple contacts added for the same person, one of which where the email is just plain wrong, but the other 2 emails are correct and both work for that contact. We've got this floating deal over here with no contact associated with it, and we've got 3 deals just associated with 3 different companies. So in terms of our ability to close a sale, this might not be an issue, but in terms of attribution, this becomes a hurdle because one of the main ways we can tie together that full attribution story is by using a lead's email address or domain to unify our systems. So if Leah Clocker at data.com is the first person who filled out our demo form, we want that email address to be associated at least with the company that's associated with subsequent deals. In this case, we've got 3 Leahs in our system, And if we programmatically matched up our lead data to our deal data, we would not see that Leah's that great a lead. At best, we might be able to see that she's associated with this deal, but we wouldn't catch this deal or this deal if we were doing that matchup automatically.
It would definitely be a good deal.
You're a great lead. So obviously that was an egregious example. None of your CRMs are going to be anywhere near that messy. However, the problem is real, and it persists partially because when we're looking at our CRMs for day-to-day usage, we see something a little more like this. And we're more concerned about why Olga over here is the only one closing deals and Larry's just adding extra zeros to the end of everything than we are about the fact that this company name doesn't match. We just don't see it day to day. And I'll make another side note on something that could be improved in this funnel. So you'll notice that these stage names are present tense. One kind of thing we'll generally recommend is using past tense for clarity. Proposing is a bit of a nebulous term, like where does that start and stop? But proposed means we sent a proposal, we presented things. We also recommend keeping your overall stages fewer and more meaningful and using subtasks and templates. So instead of saying write proposal, send proposal, present proposal, we have proposed, and under that might be steps, or in the prior step might be sub-steps. So just kind of a note there on this general best practices. All right. And then finally, the problem of tracing leads through to revenue actually gets worse when we look at the finance view of our closed deals. And the big picture problem that we're trying to solve here is that out of the box, generally, our operational and sales software just isn't built to make attribution across these systems simple or easy. That's not to say it's impossible, but it requires a decent amount of thoughtfulness and planning. So ultimately, this is what we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to revisit the graphic from earlier. We get an email address for our lead. We track that lead's progression through our sales funnel. We map the invoice revenue back to that lead. So email address, see how it progresses, map contact to revenue. Like everything in the attribution world, there's a lot of different ways to achieve this and split it apart. Simpler is generally better. But at the core of all of that is getting your underlying data in order so you can map things across systems in an ongoing, sustainable manner. All right, now on to the final, most fun part, which is getting paid.
Happy I get to speak about that slide. So for revenue recognition, when a deal is marked closer one, is your system actually accurate? Sometimes we see teams rely solely on what has been entered in the CRM for deal size or projected revenue, and it's never reconciled with what finance actually bills or collects post-sale. So for example, your CRM says $500,000 for a sale, but only $358,000 was billed. Decide what metric you're going to assign to that opportunity. Are you measuring based on first invoice, year-to-date information, or lifetime revenue? You don't want to mix and match the numbers. Pick one that you can measure upfront that gives your team consistent numbers to work with. You also want to spot check this regularly. And again, consistency, data clarity are important here, the theme for today. Generally, too, if your team disagrees on what revenue looks like, it's not sales versus marketing or so-and-so's right or wrong. It's likely the data is just misaligned. So maybe take a peek at that. Numbers to know for revenue recognition. When we think about what's working, two numbers tend to come up again and again: cost per acquisition and lifetime value. The CPA tells us how much it costs to land a customer. We can look at it by campaign to see which efforts are most efficient. We can also look at by audience type or ICP, so to understand which segments are the easiest or most expensive to convert. Lifetime value, or the LTV, tells us how much a customer is worth over time. Again, we want to look at it by audience or ICP to see which types of customers grow and renew. Now, here's why that matters. If your CPA is too high and your LTV is too low, that's not sustainable. But if your CPA is a little bit higher for an audience with a higher LTV, that might be a trade-off worth making in your marketing investments. So we're not just optimizing these numbers in isolation, they are a balancing act. And the better you source and attribute your data, the better you can show ROI and market more effectively. So more helpful metrics in the process. These tell you where your sales process might be helping or hurting your results. So for your sales cycle length, Shorter sales cycle means quicker ROI. That doesn't always mean rush your deals, but if one campaign consistently closes faster, that gives you valuable insight. So for existing client growth, if your current customers are expanding through upsells, renewals, referrals, that increases the lifetime value, which gives you more room to tolerate a higher CPA for your marketing efforts. Not every lead has to be cheap in the long term if the return is strong. And so finally, one of the most telling sets of numbers is the lead to MQL, MQL to SQL, and SQL to your closed won ratios. These show you where your leads are getting stuck or falling off. If you're generating a lot of MQLs, but only a few become SQLs, that's a signal. Either the leads aren't qualified or that handoff needs work. Having these stages defined and measured gives your team the ability to intervene and make those improvements. So takeaway on these metrics, they help you identify where the friction is, and that's how you make targeted improvements.
Again, simpler is generally better because when it comes to salespeople entering into things into CRM, your level of compliance is in direct opposition to your level of complexity. So it's really important to get the basics right and not go nuts with the rest of it. Contacts, companies, deals. These have to be clean. One contact per human, deals tied to correct humans, and don't go crazy with the parent-child companies if you can help it. Your deals need to move through the pipeline in real time, not all at once when you close the deal. And if you're in the habit of forgetting them in the middle stage and then pushing them all the way through at the end, you're crippling your ability to diagnose potential funnel issues because you won't have realistic metrics that you can look back at to really see what's happening there. It also might point to having too many stages, that if it's not obvious that they need to move on and it's not showing up in reporting, it's probably a sign that you have a little too many things clogging your CRM. And deal value at close, this needs to be real or it's relatively worthless. You can always manually fix this by compiling reports and tying that in, but it does make us report compilers grumble. It takes longer, and it means it will take you longer to get to meaningful metrics because we want those metrics to use real dollars. What I have always found is explaining the why behind the importance of this accuracy, kind of explaining the bigger picture behind the metrics you're trying to track and why. That tends to help with getting the teams on board so they don't just think you're a person organizing the CRM for no real reason. Nobody has time for that. All right. So in closing, before we jump to Q&A, if you want a hip and happening attribution ready sales funnel, here are some quick tips for attribution success you can bring back to the team. So number one, we talked about this, have your leads flow into your CRM directly whenever you can. Don't rely on a group inbox or salespeople grabbing things. That's a way to miss leads. Two, have someone review incoming leads at a minimum daily and qualify them. Either move them on to someone for next steps or mark them as disqualified. This alone is valuable data about the performance of your campaigns. Number three, we talked about this. Align your CRM stages to your actual sales process and make the stages as clear as possible. Re-review this at least annually because processes change, they evolve. It's a good point to come back to and say, okay, does this still work for us and our customers, or is the reality looking different, or does the reality need to look different? Number four, have a regular cadence, at least twice a year, ideally 4 times a year minimum, of compiling those sales and revenue data to review key metrics that Leah discussed. And this will help you understand where you need to focus improvements or make updates in your sales and marketing process. It takes the conversation from, I feel like this part is weak, to like, oh, we have metrics that say that this is where we have lead fall off and where we need to focus. And then finally, bonus points for this one. It's not strictly speaking an attribution problem on its own, and it might seem antiquated to some of us millennials, but it's still critical, and it's still something we see as an issue sometimes today. Make sure your phone, even if it rings only once in a while, is answered quickly and professionally by people who can either sell or who can quickly direct the call to someone who can, and then get those leads in the CRM right away. This one gets taken for granted, but it can be a source of lost potential leads. All right. Leah, anything else to add before we move on to Q&A?
I would just say if anyone is struggling with any of these points, we'd love to talk to you about it. We've helped a lot of clients kind of tidy up their attribution, work on sales process. So just let us know how we can support you.
All right. Looks like we have Q&A questions here. So Kurt, I'm answering yours, and then I'll get to Anna's here. Anna's and Molly's, yours are kind of the same, so I might kind of answer those two together. All right, so Anna asks, if my CRM looks like a typical CRM and isn't organized, what steps would you take to clean it up? And Molly says, CRM management feels so complex and there's a lot we can do with it, but bandwidth limits us. We have one marketing person for a small business. Any advice? I know a CRM needs a lot of cleanup. So the first thing I would do is I would go to the grocery store and I would get a big bag of M&M because you're going to need it to motivate yourself through the rest of CRM cleanup. So I'm going to kind of answer Anna's first and spin that to Molly's. So if your CRM is just kind of a mess all over, I would say step one is to actually step back with your team and agree on some standards that people can be kept to. Like figure out what your pipeline should look like. Figure out what's the minimum we expect you to document for a lead once it's entered. You need that in place. And then the next step that I would take personally is to basically export everything to spreadsheets. So all the customers, all the companies, every field, export to spreadsheet. And that gives you the ability to take an eagle eye look at all of it. And that's where you can dig in and assess what issues do I really need to correct and what issues are maybe nice to have. Like if I have multiple contacts for one contact, that's a serious issue. I do need to clean that up. If I have missing data on an obscure field that I would really like to have, but it doesn't really meaningfully impact any reports, that's maybe something we don't worry about too much. We have to be kind of ruthless about our prioritization. And then unfortunately from there is generally a one-time cleanup project that happens where you're identifying, hey, these contacts need to be merged, these companies need to be merged. I like exporting it all to spreadsheet because you can mark everything that needs to be fixed and then you can split it up and maybe assign some parts to other people. So if you do have salespeople and they own contacts, you could maybe assign them to clean up their own contacts. On to Molly's point about bandwidth, it does have to be a team effort. I don't think one marketing person can be fully responsible for CRM sanity. The sales team has to be on board with helping clean it up and keeping it clean. And that conversation has to be a balancing act of what metrics do we all agree on that we need and what are we willing to commit to get those metrics. When it comes to marketing attribution, sometimes salespeople struggle to see the value in that, but that's often because they don't have experience with seeing campaigns. You can share this webinar with them. This is a great webinar to share. Molly asked, can you tell that to my boss? But, salespeople often feel like marketing never sends good leads. And it's because salespeople aren't used to seeing good data on where the lead actually came from. And that unfortunately is kind of a systemic issue stemming back to us having these giant sales stacks that don't integrate well with marketing materials. But if you can make a compelling argument for, I want to be mindful with the money we spend on marketing, I want to optimize it over time. And so I need at minimum, I need resources to get leads to flow into CRMs, and I need you to get the lead from the CRM instead of from your inbox. You can start to make those arguments. But it is a pain point, Molly. I think a lot of marketers are in that boat. And I'd even say our CRM is not as spotless as we like it. So get those M&Ms. It's an ongoing struggle.
And buy some for your sales team so they listen.
Yes, and they can have one M&M for contact merge. Some CRMs do have nice functionality to allow for contact merging, like HubSpot at a certain level of subscription that's available. So always look into that, but it can be painful. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, you can throw them in the Q&A. The chat is also enabled for everyone as well.
Or if you have any questions after this, share with your data team. Yeah, help.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone.